Today, we're exploring the energy transition and the role of community engagement in this transition. Who have we got on our panel of guests today?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's exciting. It feels very timely to be hosting this panel discussion, as it feels clear, clearer than ever that Victoria is moving towards a renewable energy future. The coal mines are closing. We're pivoting away from gas. And just last week, our news feeds were filled with big announcements from state and federal government about accelerating the transition to renewables. So before I jump into introducing the panelists, just in case you missed it, some of the key announcements included the net zero target being brought forward to 2045, increased emissions reduction targets, 95% of our electricity to come from renewable sources by 2035, the release of an offshore wind strategy, Marinus Link, Kerrang Link, new energy storage targets, bringing back the State Electricity Commission from the dead, and much, much more. So significant continued investment in renewables is required to achieve all of this. But from our experience in planning, engagement and renewables is that over the past decade, getting projects off the ground and underway takes much more than just technical and financial feasibility. It's just as much a social process as it is a technical one. And it's evident that having social license is critical to the long-term sustainability of the project. But what we're finding is that despite there being so many guidelines and information out there that proponents can lean on, the approaches to building community consensus vary significantly from project to project. Not everyone is getting it right, and there's still huge room for improvement. So with that background, we're pretty excited that today's panel will be discussing the role and importance of inclusive community engagement and planning processes in addressing legitimate concerns from regional Victorian communities who are impacted by the energy transition. So I'll start off with introducing Wendy Farmer. She's a very dedicated community campaigner and president of Voices of the Valley, which is a community advocacy group based in Gippsland that formed following the Hazelwood coal mine fire in 2014 and campaigns for a just transition to renewable energy for local communities. And then we've also got Chun, a senior researcher at Beyond Zero Emissions, a very reputable think tank in this space. And he's an experienced scientist and pioneer of clean technology. We've also got Peter Marriott. He's executive director from OSMI Wind, a renewable energy developer of the very well-known Delburn Wind Farm, which straddles 3 local government areas in Victoria. And OSMI's founding directors have been responsible for the development of other wind farm projects, such as those in Wonthaggi, Wardle, Bald Hills and Stockyard Hill. And then last but not least, we've also got Esther Lloyd. She's the project manager at the Gippsland Climate Change Network, which is a not-for-profit and registered charity focused on helping Gippsland achieve carbon neutrality by 2040. And she's embedded in the Latrobe Valley Authority's new energy team and on the government's group for the Gippsland Community Power Hub. So welcome Wendy, Chun, Peter and Esther.
Thanks, Beck. And unfortunately, Alex Wilson from BitGrid, who was due to attend today's session, was a late cancellation, no doubt due to some of the many extraordinary announcements from the Victorian state government in the last several weeks associated with our renewable energy transition. So let's get the panel session started. I suppose the first question I'd like to go to is Wendy. As we plan for the renewable energy transition, I mean, communities have spoken in some places really loud and clear. We cannot do this with a business as usual approach. And one of the things I see and hear a lot from government and developers about their sort of challenge with the community engagement piece is that catch cry that developers and governments use is this sort of NIMBYism, or not in my backyard. Recently, the Grid Energy Alliance report, sort of talked about the challenges of throwing this term "not in my backyard" around, and it's really kind of an expression that no longer cuts it as an excuse for disengaging with community. Wendy, as a community leader and advocate, what do you think are the most important things for governments and industries to consider when engaging communities now? And what do these governments and proponents often get wrong in the process?
Look, I think to start with, one of the things that we've been really clear, so a lot of the work that I've done is actually spoken to communities in their hopes and their concerns for the transition that is happening. We're not just starting this transition. This transition is well and truly on the way. A lot of the comments there are, it's very different for communities that have never hosted energy before. And now all of a sudden they're being asked to host wind turbines or, whatever it is in their own backyard. And, their own backyard could be 20 kilometres wide. So let's not get that when we say own backyard, it's the ocean or the land or wherever. Sometimes, people think that the industry needs to come to them first and actually say, I have an idea. And it's really the chicken and the egg. How can an industry come without having a plan? And how can, how does it actually work the right way for an industry to come? You're not going to have a plan to actually set up in an area and then go to an area. You're not going to, you are going to have a plan and then go to the area. You're not going to go to an area and go, well, we're thinking of this and have no plan, because that wouldn't make sense either. So, but as I said, these communities aren't used to having infrastructure in their backyards and hosting this infrastructure. So sometimes it's a little bit scary for them and they sort of don't quite understand what it means. I think when we really talk to these host communities, we have to start really listening to their concerns and asking them what it is they need. What do they need for the organisation or company to take the next step? What would, if we have got people opposing, what is it that you're opposing and how can we change that? And we did see that in Delburn as well. We've got Peter on the call where they did actually change the design of their wind farm to suit communities. You'll never take a whole community along with you. There could be a flood and you would ask, everybody to jump on a boat, otherwise they're going to drown. And 90% of the people will get on the boat. The other 10% will drown. So I think the realisation that we can't take a whole community with us is really important. But how do we get it right? I think that we've seen in the last week, the Victorian government has started getting it right. They're starting to have a hands-on approach. It felt like this whole industry was being left to the industry to design, and the transmission and everything that went into it. And that scared people that we have seen, especially in Gippsland in Latrobe Valley, that our community has been hurt by industry. Our community hasn't always looked after industry. And we've seen the profits go international. We don't see the profits back into our own yard. So one of the things we need to make sure is we do give good benefits to the host communities and the host homes around our wind farms or our solar farms or whatever we're actually putting on the ground. And we need to consider and work with them to do that. We need to look at best practice and work out how we can do best practice for these communities. As I said, it's understanding, working with people to understand, but also understanding environmental impacts or what that means to the environment. So one of the really big things we're seeing at the moment is the transmission, and people saying, well, it must go underground because of, or it must go overground because of. I think we really need to look at best practice. What is the environmental impact of actually putting something on the ground anywhere or above the ground? I think, I would have said last week that governments were actually getting it wrong because they were leaving it to the market. They're not. I think the other thing that we've got to be very careful of is often we hear this conversation like they're over-consulted, they don't want to be involved, they don't want to talk to you. Never believe that. The right people at the right time will be in the room. Do not believe that you should not ask them because someone has said a community is over-consulted. I think I'll leave it at it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, sorry, Beck, just on that point, I mean, do you believe that communities are becoming over-consulted, or are we way below where, we need to be in terms of baseline with consultation? Wendy?
Oh, sorry, what was the question?
I mean, you sort of said this idea of communities being over-consulted, or the risk, or people sort of saying, look, some communities are feeling over-consulted, let's not engage. Do you believe that's ever the case, or that we would
I don't think so. I believe that the right people will be in the room at the right time. And sometimes people won't come to one particular one because they don't feel that it involves them. They don't feel that they need to be there. They don't have any concerns, but then other people will go, well, I have to be there and I have to be at every meeting. So, or every consultation. So I think we've got to be open to consulting, and we've got to have a free reign that people can contact us. So what we're seeing a lot of, and OSMI did it as well, is a shop where people can come in, have a look at the design and actually discuss it, but not just discuss it, really understand the project.
Yeah, and if I could just quickly add, like the whole consultation thing, another key factor is making sure that you're presenting information at a level that they understand, because obviously the transmission wonks, they know this stuff, like all the kilovolts and whatnot, but like for the average community person, they're not going to understand a lot of what that means. So you got to make sure that the material they're putting out there connects them to the project and they understand, and you bring them along with you, not just present what you know and then just assume that they will do the research to get that, because that's a big barrier that you don't want to put in front of you with those consultative processes.
And bringing down those barriers is also really important, not just to be able to, achieve social license, but also for the developer or the proponent to learn so much from the community. It's a two-way road. And I think you raised some really interesting points, both Wendy and Chun. You sort of talked about the process itself, but then also the longevity, so the community benefit sharing schemes. And I think we'll touch on those a bit later, but you also made reference to the Delburn wind farms. So I just wanted to throw to Peter for a minute. So the Delburn wind farms and the Strzelecki Ranges, it straddles 3 local government areas, I believe. So, it's received some static from the community, and we're pretty interested to hear what you have to say about that. But when done well, what value can community engagement add to renewable energy projects?
Yeah, look, it's been a long journey on the Delburn wind farm. We've and I won't purport that we've done everything perfectly. I think we're continuing to learn. The industry needs to continue to learn and evolve as we roll out projects through time, and we're certainly doing projects differently every year that we continue to do our work. So, for example, I think you touched on, Beck, that we've been involved in projects like Wonthaggi and Bald Hills that were initiated back in the early 2000s. So those projects were developed and designed very differently to the way that we're developing and designing both the project and our engagement campaigns for projects going into the future. So look, one thing that it's really important that it is an engagement process, not an informing process. So you need to go out with an informed design so that the community know what you're actually talking about when you introduce the concept, because look, that's really important. There's no point going in and saying we're looking at a wind farm in this broad area. People want to understand what it actually means for them individually. So look, that's something that we've taken on board. We're seeing the technology change a lot through the last couple of years as well. So we've now got things like augmented reality. When talking about a wind farm in particular, one of the first questions people ask when you're talking about turbines like up to 250 meters tall is, what are they going to look like? What am I going to see? So having tools available at your fingertips to have real engagement on a one-on-one basis is really important. So we didn't have that at our fingertips when we launched, but we certainly do now. When we've seen that, having some really valuable, genuine conversations in people's backyard, where you can take the iPad and go, well, what's important to you at your house? Is it outside your living room window? Is it where you have a coffee in the backyard? And what does that actually mean for you in that context? And it really changes the conversation rather than necessarily being an adversarial one, which they can be up front. But, and developers need to realize that you are imposing some infrastructure on these people's backyards, and there needs to be a listening process and a response process. And you need to make yourselves available in many different ways, whether that be in open days where people want to have that broader forum and access to a lot of different technical information, or at a shop front where people can drop in while they're getting their mail or, picking up the milk or something like that. But also having local people who understand that community, who can go into people's own homes when invited and have that sort of personal conversation as well in that in situ context. So I think it's really important to have a pretty broad range of suite of options, and that takes upfront investment by the developer, and that's really what the commitment needs to be to do those things well.
Yeah, I think there's some real leaders in this space, pioneering, really investing a lot in their community engagement process, and engaging, community engagement specialists to do the work. And I think, setting the framework is really important for the discussions and tailoring it to that specific community. And because I think a lot of community members sort of come, as Wendy was saying earlier, are too afraid to speak up because they don't know where they can realistically have influence over these projects. So I just wanted to know from the panel, particularly Peter, but maybe others want to jump in, like, is it possible to have genuine community input into the design and the delivery of the project and the enabling infrastructure, the transmission lines, the ports that are required for offshore wind, everything? And, can you give an example of how this has led to positive change?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to kick that off from so I come from an engineering background and finance background. So my natural point when talking about projects is to go into design and optimizing and all those sorts of things. So it's important when then going into an engagement space to be really open with the community about what the levers are that are open for negotiate, not negotiation necessarily, but a design response, to listen to what the community have to say and make the project malleable so that you can then ultimately pursue something which is going to sit well in that community context. These are long-term projects. So it's really important that you are clear that, say, designing a wind farm, you are designing something which is there to capture wind. So that it doesn't make sense to put a turbine at the bottom of a valley to hide it from a view. They need to be on the top of the hill to make it an efficient electrical generation facility. But there may be things like, say at Delburn, we did some initial visualizations from one of the towns, and we saw the density of turbines that were visible from that town were higher than what we would have liked. So we looked at massaging that side of the project in its design response to reduce the number of turbines. We also saw things like noise was particularly important to people as an outcome. So we built in an extra design buffer and reduced the turbine footprint overall across the project. And so there's things that you can do in terms of a response, but you've got to be quite clear, like particularly a transmission line, it's linear infrastructure, and it still needs to get from point A to point B. So moving it in one section will have a downstream impact on others. So there are things that are possible, and like I designed and did the approval and land engagement process for a very long transmission line at Stockyard Hill, which was 75 kilometres of high voltage line. And it's important to have those conversations around like where the pole locations are with the landowner and the community. And it can be as simple as moving it from the corner of a paddock so it changes the way people muster their sheep to somewhere which is better for the landowner. And having, those tangible discussions are really important around what's on the table and what you can do in terms of alignment changes, but being very clear on what the other implications are for others.
And if I can quickly add on to that, I just wanted to say with the community engagement, you also realize a lot of new opportunities that as a developer, you may not know from like desktop analysis of what's around. And you tap into things like, what do they care about? What local industries are there? What can they benefit in terms of renewable transitioning? Like if it's like food processing, like a lot of Victorian like countries, like a lot of massive food processing facilities that all looking to decarbonize or employs a lot of local people. If you connect these transmission lines and these renewables can help you decarbonize this food thing and create zero emissions like food products you can export to the world, then you create a really sort of engaging and sort of exciting like vision of what it can be, not just like, oh, I got to put in the infrastructure on this paddock and it's going to be ugly. You go to like, what does this mean? This means jobs, this means additional revenue, this means new industry opportunities that wasn't there before. And even with the lines on paddock, you can have like local, like agricultural, like agri-solar and things like that, tap into these transmission lines and create additional revenue for the landholders. And there's just lots of synergies that you can build on, but you have to work it in partnership with these local communities because they need to have agency and ownership of this and tell you what they care about so you can plan according to that. And that's the best way you can get these partnerships to be successful, not just forcing your own thing of what you think is most efficient. But this is that kind of like collaboration that we love to do at Beyond Zero Emissions. But yes, definitely a big opportunity. And sorry, I'll leave it.
Chun, I want to drill into that actually. That point, you know, the need to approach, and with Peter's example, the need to approach this with an open mind, to be collaborative, to sort of share a bit of control and allow community to sort of engage and shine on these kind of questions and dilemmas alongside. I mean, this is a fair amount to orchestrate for a developer, let alone government. Is anyone getting this right anywhere else outside of Australia? Like, are you seeing any other examples of people addressing this approach so effectively?
Look, outside of, I guess Europe is an example people often go to. They do have, like in Netherlands, they have massive wind farms that are partially community owned, where they can really derive benefits from the revenue that the wind farms generate. And that taps into a lot of the industry ecosystem that they're also trying to decarbonize. Like Europe is obviously ahead in Australia in some respects. But I also want to say, like in Australia, this realization and this like connection about these partnerships is also coming into play. Like you see, like the Victorian announcements, while they are sort of separate, you do have around transmission, around generation, storage, and also those clean industry hubs coming together. I mean, I don't know behind the scenes what's going on, but I can definitely see a sort of this picture that comes together in terms of opportunities. It's all about making sure that you have all those aligned and strategically planned for and coordinated with industries and communities on the ground. Like also in New South Wales, they've got their whole energy infrastructure roadmap and the clean manufacturing precincts, along with their net zero industry decarbonisation kind of pathways. Queensland's got their whole jobs and energy plan, which is like very exciting, I guess, for a lot of the renewable guys. But you know, things are happening in Australia, and given the recent like Rewind a Nation kind of funding, as well as the reconstruction reconstruction fund for Australia, like there are pieces coming together. But you're right, the collaboration coordination piece is quite massive. But it's also something I think a lot of government departments are seeing. They're seeing the opportunity and they're seeing where it can lead to. It's just a matter of doing it. But the reports that are coming out and the initiatives that are being announced are very promising on that front.
Can I jump in? I actually, from I suppose the community side of things, would like to see more support for our communities. Perhaps that's not-for-profit, such as the Gippsland Climate Change Network and others like Voices of the Valley, so Wendy Farmer. Range of from informing to empowering. So you have inform, consults, involve, collaborate, and empower. And at each step, you're involving these decision-making abilities at each step. So public participation at the first one might be fact sheets, and the promise that you give to the communities at that stage is we will keep you informed. Whereas at the other end, empowering the communities might be placing the final decision-making in the hands of the public on a certain thing. So that would be citizen juries and ballots or delegated decisions. And I suppose in best practice, which again, we'll talk about a little bit later, you know, you're trying to edge it to that, you know, empowerment end, but it takes so much more collaboration with the communities and so much more trust to be built, which takes time. And as we're seeing increasingly that, you know, we're on shorter and shorter timelines to be able to deliver some of these projects. So it's a really messy space. And I think there also needs to be acknowledged that transition is uncomfortable, even if you are totally on board the renewables transition bus. It is an uncomfortable space, and that's okay. And I think some people, particularly in the community, are concerned when it is uncomfortable, and just making sure that you emphasize with them, allow them to understand that, you know, that unfortunately is to be expected, but we're going to try and work through this together. But I won't conversation because I know there's a lot more that we have to get through.
Yeah, I just want to add on to what you just said though, Esther, because, you know, there's a lot of communities out there that are doing amazing stuff, especially in the renewable energy space. And how can even industry support those projects to get off the ground? They're small projects. They're usually, you know, a very small community. The businesses that are developing these projects have business skills. You know, how can they work nearly in a partnership with the community to also support some sort of resilience in community energy for these small communities around hosting the, you know, the infrastructure? I think it's really important that it does become that partner between the two rather than be pushed away. And as you know, you really want a community to support what is happening, because they become your eyes and ears for a project as well as a business. You know, they see what happens and they look after your business while you actually look after them. So how do you do it in partnership?
Thanks.
It's a very interesting point. Beck, I wanted to bring up one of the questions that Sonia Wells raised from the audience as Chun was talking. You know, and this one maybe back to you, Chun, you know, do we need to think better about advising the community about additional opportunities to kind of engage in, you know, around those sort of economic development buttons? Or is it best at this stage, you know, when we're sharing the opportunity to put in a new development or piece of infrastructure, or whatever it might be, are we just leaving the engagement at that point to kind of just understanding what the community's thinking rather than getting them more involved and advising them on how they can be more engaged in the progress of this sector?
No, that's a good question, but I would say I think you would be surprised when you actually get boots on the ground and start talking to the community. A lot of people have thought about, you know, ideas that they want to try and pursue or what they see as a future for their region. And it's not about, sometimes not even about advising them. Sometimes it's just about listening and then helping, like what Wendy and Esther were saying about like listening and empowering them to do the thing, because they're opportunities. And going to the point, I listed a lot of great examples of like where things are headed. But I should stress that a lot of our work is all about, you know, this is the opportunity, but you can risk losing all of that if you don't do your social license and community engagement right. Mm-hmm. And so we're really trying to elevate that whole point, because like you said, it's a partnership. And so like we've done some work in the Hunter and Gladstone, we're talking to industries that you wouldn't think, you know, being such fossil fuel based areas, that they would have thought of a lot about transitioning, or they might want to stick to coal and whatnot. But actually a lot of them have some fantastic ideas, and it's just about elevating them and like, look at these guys doing great things. There can be so much more, just help them grow. These are the kind of things that government and industries and investors can support. And then you have like a whole regional ecosystem that's community driven, but also has big like opportunities in terms of, you know, what the future holds for that area. And so same in Victoria, like La Trobe, there's so many exciting things about how with the offshore wind and what manufacturing opportunities there, plus all the food processing. Similarly in Shepparton, Ballarat, Bendigo, like all of those areas, key like food processing areas, like amazing technology you can tap into, and beyond as well. You know, like Portland's got the aluminium smelters, big opportunities there as well. I won't go into all of it, but like getting boots on the ground, that's one of the first things you need to do. And like the recent Victorian infrastructure investment, that framework, highlighting that early engagement, this is a fantastic first step. It's just a matter of now doing it instead of having it on the paper.
Thanks, Chun. I mean, just on that point, there's, the Victorian state government has released a preliminary Victorian transmission and investment framework. I think that's the one you're talking about.
Yes, yes.
That does have a lot of engagement embedded early on through both the scenario planning for transmission all the way through to procurement, and then obviously the more nutty end of the engagement process with engagement around the environmental effects statement, submission process, and those sorts of things. A big part of it is about benefit sharing. And I think one of the challenges potentially around benefit sharing is these linear assets that we have with transmission. The benefits shared at the either end of the line, but not in the middle. And Esther, I might sort of throw to you, from your perspective and the work you do, what's the importance about getting a robust community benefit sharing scheme up and going around some of these projects?
I mean, we've talked about engagement and having the right people, the right type at the right time on the right platform. Like, it was complicated, but to give you an example, Gippsland has 223 communities. Only 4.5% of them are above 5,000 people. So we have very small, diverse, unique communities. Not all of them will be impacted from, renewable energy development in the same way. Some of them, won't be impacted at all by some of the impacts, visually, transmission lines or turbines. But, what do we do around trying to make sure there's equity around the benefit sharing across our wider regions? It's a huge challenge. And it's not just social, economic, but there's also environmental, avenues we could be investigating in social license. And it's exciting, I suppose, from what I've seen so far, that, you know, social license is in every conversation that I'm having with the renewable energy developers, and it's new for our communities. You know, before in the past they were just informed. Now they're being asked to engage. So there's a lot of learning. There's a lot of different levels that we could be doing social benefit sharing on, from the individual, say the landowner, to the community, to the neighborhood level. Like it's all different. But the best practice that I've seen so far isn't cookie cutter, which makes things hard. You really are drilling into the communities you are engaging with. They capture the unique characteristics and challenges of those towns, and they have positive, lasting legacies. Now, this is new for Australia. We're still working this out. Overseas, there are some better examples. I suppose for me, my comments around the not in my backyard, and more recently the above or below ground transmission, when it comes to benefit sharing, the community has, you know, this voice. So if you say not in my backyard, go away, don't want to talk to you, you actually miss out on the opportunity to define what you would like to see in your communities going forward. So I suppose my advice to the communities going forward, if you are approached, or maybe reaching out to, you know, be proactive to some of these renewable energy developers, you know, what is it that is making you really uncomfortable as an individual, as a township? Be honest about that. What it is that excites you, that you hope to see, because that really does help the developers get an idea or a sense of, you know, where they should be investing their time and money. And, you know, what would, if there is something you are really concerned about, what would help bring you along? You know, what it is. You know, no one wants to see transmission lines in their backyard. I don't want to see housing estates take over the paddocks in my backyard. But, you know, development, unfortunately, is going to happen. So, you know, what is it that you need to see to bring you along, I suppose, is a question that I'm increasingly putting out there to those around the social license, you know, area. Tell your story. It's really powerful.
It's pleasing to hear that you've seen a sort of a positive shift in the way that the community benefit sharing schemes are being devised nowadays. I mean, you know, I've been in the renewables space for, you know, over 10 years now. And back in the day, like, we're not particularly proud of this, but, you know, proponents were putting forward, you know, just handing out footy jumpers or simple upgrades to a town hall or a football stadium as sort of an upfront one-off contribution. But now it's really pleasing to see that these community benefit sharing programs are much more sort of comprehensive. They've got longevity, and they're thinking about the future generations that will have to, or, you know, possibly impacted by that project. So yeah, that's really, really pleasing to hear that. And I think, Peter, you actually had some comments on some community best practice community benefit sharing options.
Yeah, look, it's just, I think, as Esther said, it's not a one size fits all. So you've got to do your research, understand what the community wants, but it's also a really big part of what a development of a project. You can empower communities to design. So look, that's something that we're doing at Delburn. We've set some metrics about what we're offering, but we want to put it in the community's hand in terms of how that actually gets distributed, how it gets used. It's not for us to tell communities how we want to invest in their backyard. We want them to do that themselves, as to whether that's around social programs, environmental programs, mixtures thereof. So that's something that we've committed to. The other thing, from a developer's point of view, like particularly when we came into the Latrobe Valley area and that South Gippsland area, we were very mindful. There's been a lot of commitments and promises made by lots of industry, and not a lot of it's been fulfilled, and Wendy and Esther can probably attest to that. So we were very cautious about making big, bold promises in a really specific sense, because the trust within those communities is pretty low around new industries coming in and promising the world and not delivering. So I think there's a balance there that needs to be made. But I think by the same token, there needs to be an appreciation by developers that, you know, your benefit sharing model shouldn't just be we're going to hand out X dollars per turbine to people living within X kilometres, and that's our benefit sharing approach. It really needs to be much more nuanced and nimble, based on the environmental setting of the project, what the community surrounding the project is, what their needs and wants are, and respond. So look, an example on Delburn, we saw an enormous want, and I think Wendy's already touched on this, of lots and lots of community groups wanting to do community-based renewable energy, and there's been no shortage of effort and want and will, but the economics of it just haven't stacked up to the extent to enable them to proceed. So we've offered up a percentage of our project for community investment to come into Delburn, so people can put dollars in and get a commercial return out of renewable energy in a direct and tangible sense, and provide that opportunity. That's not to say that that should be done on every project. These are like hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollar projects, and community pockets are just not that deep. So it was one of the things we saw as an opportunity for this one. For our next project, we may not necessarily do that, but it's really about offering up those opportunities for that broader community, whether it be directly surrounding your project, but also acknowledging your projects have a much larger footprint than just in your own direct backyard. It's how you offer up those opportunities to support communities along the journey as we transition.
And I think, can I just add on to that? Because one of the things with renewable energy is that about getting social licenses, it is about working with communities. It is about, you know, being part of that community, where we haven't always seen that. So especially in Latrobe Valley, you know, we've had the mining industry that have told us what they're going to do. We're now going to dig west. They didn't say, do you mind that we dig west on our mine? They just did it. Oh, we're going to open up small land to do a mine. They just did it. They didn't actually ask us. So what I found when very early on, when, you know, renewable energy projects were starting to offer something to communities, communities became suspicious. They thought they were being brought out because, you know, these companies are actually offering us and asking us. We weren't used to that. So I think that's, you know, for the very first projects that have happened, that will be something. And then we will see along the flow that communities expect to be hosting and partnering with these projects. The other thing I just really want to touch on, because I think it's really important, and I really gave this a real thought over the weekend, is when we use the word impact on communities, often communities take the word impact as a negative, and they think, you know, I'm going to be impacted by, I'm going to be hit by something really hard, you know, so that's what a definition of impact. There's the other side of impact. It's the positives of impact. I was actually at in Queensland, and I was talking to a philanthropist, and I said, when you use the word impact, she said, it's so positive, because their impact is actually making big changes, and it's making good changes for people. So I think when we start using, you know, when we do use the word impact, it's how we frame it to actually community. We are going to give you opportunities. We are going to be part of your community. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Thanks, Wendy. I think it's a really good point. You know, impact of a sledgehammer of hugs and kisses are two very different reactions and feelings. There are sort of a few questions coming up on transmission, and Wendy, you mentioned the word social license again. I wanted just to kind of tap into that. Given the scale of the infrastructure required for transmission itself, I mean, how realistic is it to achieve social license on these major projects?
I'm not convinced you'll get complete social license. As I said before, the boat example, 90% of the people will jump on the boat and the others will say there's not an issue here. The fact is that energy is changing. We all want to be able to turn our lights on. We all want to be able to run our fridges, and we want to know that our energy is backed up. We need to also go back to those communities that have actually been impacted in two ways by the way we have produced energy now. There's been financial impacts early on before privatisation of the power stations, SEC, I'll mention that name. You know, we had good financial practices. But one of the other things is the communities that have hosted the energy now have paid a cost. They have paid a cost with their health. Okay, the cost will tell you that people that have lived around these power stations will have a life expectancy for males, I think it's about 4 years less. Okay, I'm actually in the middle of the third generation in my family dying because of the power station or power stations around me. So I think we need to really balance it when we actually look at, you know, I don't want to see a wind turbine or I don't want to see a power line. if we want energy, and we want energy that we can flick on when we walk on the door, we can flick our kettle on because we want hot water and would like a drink now. We have to consider some minor issue that we might have. If we do a house renovation, we have a minor issue. We might not like something, but we get used to it. An example, when we had the big fires in 2014 through Wardle, and I remember the first time I drove through there and I looked at all the burnt out area, and it was a shock. Like, it was just in your face shock. As the week went on and I drove along there, you hardly noticed it. In the end, you didn't notice it at all. So sometimes when we do see big infrastructure, initially it will be a shock, but we will get used to it. In the end, we won't even see it.
Thank you, Wendy. Beck, I think we might have time for one more quick question.
Yeah, look, you've touched a lot on like community sentiment and the importance of early and meaningful engagement, and, you know, bringing community along for the journey and developing it as part of their narrative too. But we're also aware that some projects can evoke really heated debates and fear-mongering amongst the community, media, experts involved, which can lead to the rise of misinformation and distrust of government and developers. So how can we ensure that the community is provided with the right information and the opportunities to ensure their voices are heard? So I just want to throw to Esther for a minute, because I know that you work very closely with the community in this respect.
Yeah, so working with the Latrobe Valley Authority, the Gippsland Climate Change Network, and many of the councils through various, you know, stakeholder engagements that we've had, you know, with the communities, we keep coming back to that it is unclear of who is responsible for taking on the consultation, the engagement, the decision-making points of the different things. Like there's so many different points that the proponents for, let's say, offshore wind can decide, and some that it's going to be federally government decided, some of them state government. It's just a mess. So we've been trying really hard to try and work on a platform. Web online platform seems to be, you know, what people will go to automatically. That is, I suppose, the spool where we can draw in all the links, all the information, all the announcement in one spot, so people don't have to try and find it. You know, the wide web is amazing. It has all the information there, but that's kind of its curse as well as its blessing, that, you know, the misinformation gets, you know, very hard to tell the difference, I suppose, of what is, you know, what is actually misinformation is what is actually, you know, up-to-date information. This is all compounded by the fact that things are happening so fast that the information that was correct last week might not be correct the next week. So there are people in this space really trying to address this issue of, you know, how can we make this clearer for the people who need to know? How can we improve transparency? Not that anyone's trying to hide it, but, you know, in the accessibility of the accessibility of information, I suppose. So, yeah, bear with us. I suppose we're trying.
I do want to also add, like, it goes to what everyone has been saying, you know, do it early, do it right, be transparent, and also present the information at a level, again, that they understand, so you don't leave that gap for them to be confused, that they have to go and find their own information, perhaps get lost in some of that. And I do also want to flag the great work that the Australian Energy Infrastructure Commissioner has done around some of this stuff. Their reports are a bit, you know, text heavy and stuff, but they've done some really great analysis about what has worked. And they were previously with the Wind Farm Commission to deal with a lot of those issues. And, you know, things about, you know, having the community benefits and social license and early community engagement, like all of that comes from their work. I mean, among other things. But you really need to do it right to offset that thing. And that's the biggest risk. And also, I would say that's probably one of the reasons why social license and community engagement has become a lot more prominent these days. I think the experiences around, say, like the Western Victoria Transmission Project has really shown people the value of getting it right and doing it not as a tick box kind of exercise, but a genuine engagement where you do have to sort of provide back to the community. And the importance of that, because it's not just getting that project wrong, it's that you feed this to the whole country, and everyone anywhere decides, you know what, this is the next big bad and we don't want it, which is just a terrible outcome for everyone. And so that's really the risk here. But governments and developers are really catching wise to it. So it's great to see some of these new initiatives. And just one last thing I want to add before, just be creative about some of these things. Like Peter mentioned, some of these, like people want to tap in community renewables, have some distribution connection points so they can feed it into this big transmission line. And then you give additional revenue and development projects for these communities who want to do that. And other people, if they're affected by health, it doesn't have to be just direct revenue. It could be like, well, this wind farm will fund a local health center or community center or an arts precinct or something that they care about. It's not just like money to money and electricity. It's like a whole bunch of things that it can enable. So when you talk to the community, you would find about these things and then you'll figure out solutions in collaboration with them. And then that's how you really you build that genuine partnership.
Fantastic.
Can I just add though, quickly on that social license, sometimes I have seen industry also do really, really good, yet have big campaigns against them in their proposal. And I think that's, really unfortunate when that misinformation is actually spread and spread well. And as Esther said, and then it's put on the internet and then you just have to Google, how many birds will be dead and you can find some amazing amount, or you can find just a couple, and it's not that I'd like any birds dead, but actually I see them hit my window sometimes, So I think sometimes that misinformation is spread by those that actually really can organise good campaign to stop something. But you've just got to work through that as a business. Just actually stay honest, stay to the truth. And if you can't be caught out by, telling lies, you will actually be trusted in the end. So I think I just want to put that caution out there, because there are industries that are doing really, really well, yet we'll end up with campaign against them. So be honest, be truth, just work with the people.
Thanks, Wendy. That's really interesting.
Look, maybe if you've got time, I'll just add a developer's perspective on this as well. I think the world of social media has changed the development landscape a lot over the last 10 years, and we've seen that since developing projects. So communities are much better connected across Australia and internationally now, and the access to information, people have that at their fingertips now, and it's no longer just those that have access to a computer. Everyone's the vast majority of the population have a little computer in their pocket they carry around with them. So don't pretend it's not there. Don't try and control it. It's really for the developer to stay, as Wendy said. Have your information readily available. It has to be in a way which is digestible to the community, and just be available and be truthful and be consistent, and I think that's really what it is. And we've seen, like, around some of our social media, we've used it as a platform. It's got its challenges, but we've also seen that the community are really getting, there is broad consensus, and we've seen that at a couple of elections now, that the community wants some action in transition, and there's people in the community that are actually willing to stand up on social media and challenge the misinformation. So there's it's a delicate balance from a developer's point of view, when you're a proponent on a project, to sit back and watch, but you've just got to find that right balance and support the community in terms of finding that right information, and you'll find people out there willing to support you that you never thought would be there. So you just got to hang tough and ride through the process, because it is bumpy at times.
Thank you, Peter, for sharing. I think maybe just one more kind of closing question to wrap up today's webinar. At the end of the day, we've developed the enabling infrastructure to achieve our targets. We're producing more renewable energy together than we ever have. We're resting on our successes. And we're looking back. How do we know, or how can we measure whether the community expectation is aligned with the changes that have happened around him? How do we evaluate the success of good community engagement with renewables, Peter?
Look, I think it's an important thing we need to do to continue to evolve. I think it's really hard to do until a project has been implemented and embedded in that community, to see how it's gone through its full life cycle. We're seeing that across a lot of projects, and I think Wendy touched upon it on in a different context. But a lot of wind farms will get a lot, like the complaint process is pretty heavily weighted towards the development phase, and then there'll be a period during construction or early ops, and then typically these assets then embed themselves pretty comfortably within an environment and a community. So really, you've got to go through that journey and listen at all the different points along it to understand how you can do things better. But naturally, there is a point that you've actually got to deliver on your promises and then listen to the response once you've actually gone through that process and had the opportunity to deliver on those promises.
Thanks, Peter. Esther, how do we know we've succeeded in getting that alignment with community expectations?
I think obviously it's clearer, the further, in hindsight is a great, teacher of how we're going, but hindsight can be rather unhelpful because you can't change what's already happened. For me, I suppose on a personal level, on the ground level, it's the excitement. I was at an offshore wind engagement opportunity for stakeholders in the community last week, and one small company based in Gippsland who does belts and wires and fire extinguisher covers was just absolutely floored at how many small opportunities there are for supply chains for these coming renewable, amazing transformation that we're going through. So, we often think of the big guys, the big blade, the big manufacturing, but seeing the excitement of someone who has not been involved in this space suddenly opening their minds to all the possibilities that they could be a part of personally, I think is, for me, exciting. And I think that shows that when the community engage and they're starting to get excited about certain elements, even if there is still quite a lot of uncertainty of what that looks like and some concerns about how that's going to be developed, I think you're on the right stage or at the right process. Excitement.
Thanks, Esther. Chun.
Oh, 100% agree with Esther. I think that excitement on the ground, that's a big tick that you're going right places. But yeah, it is so hard to know for sure. Like things that work for one community may not work for another as well. So that's the difficult thing. It does have to be tailored to every single situation. But yeah, I mean, I do want that excitement that people willing to contribute towards it, coming to those meetings, engaging online, showing their interest. Some of it could be concerns, but in a constructive way. I think that's when you've done it right. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Constructive concerns, excitement. Wendy, how do we know?
I'm going to have to go opportunities. And I think especially when we start talking to our young people across our region and them looking forward to the opportunities that are before them that they'd never thought that they would have. I think this is when we're seeing that we've got it right. It's an exciting time. We are in the middle. What a time to be alive. We've extended our bucket, and with energy as it is, who knows where it will go? I think we're only just on the very start of what we will see in the energy future, and we're here to be part of it.
Wow, thank you, Wendy. What a rousing note to finish on. Round of applause for that. Thank you. Beck, we've had such a great discussion today. Any thoughts from you?
We have. I think it was a great way to finish talking about sort of this monitoring and evaluation side of things, because so much focus goes into the design and the upfront community engagement, but more needs to happen at sort of this, the construction operation phase, and then monitoring and evaluating all of that as well. So, maybe that can be a discussion at the next webinar or something like that. But I think we've touched on some really interesting points, and I'm just really glad that we've had so many people from such a range of sectors come forward and talk not only about the issues, but I think a sort of a common thread between all of these discussions has also been about bringing forward the positive voices as well, into that narrative and into the stories behind all of these projects, so that it's more of a balanced discussion as well. So yeah, I found that really interesting.
Awesome. Well, on that note, thank you to our panelists for meeting with us today and sharing your wisdom, your knowledge and experience. It's been really enjoyable and immensely informative. So thank you very much. And also thank you to all of the people that attended today. I think we've had well over 100, which is a little unexpected. So sounds like we might be doing a few more of these discussions, in focus discussions into the future. But I wanted to thank you for taking the time out of your schedules to join in today's discussion. We'll be sharing a recording of today's session, as well as some other things that are inspiring us at the moment, including the Grid Energy Alliance report on the Community First Framework for Electricity Transmission Development. It's certainly a piece of work that speaks to a lot of the issues that we covered today. And also for those who are in Melbourne over the next couple of days, the All Energy Conference being hosted. Apparently, it's the one party that you need to go to, and it's free. It's the All Energy Conference. They're not a sponsor of this program today, but apparently if you're in the energy space, you should be at the All Energy Conference. So we might see you there, and we'll certainly see you next time. Thank you very much for joining in, and enjoy the rest of your week. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks to our panelists.
Cool.
Thanks.